Hello everyone, I'm Francisco Quixtan, or just Mr. Quixtan if you're my student. I've been teaching band, choir, orchestra, and general music for longer than I care to admit, if you can't tell by these baggies. After teaching students from pre-K to 12th grade, there's a lot of things that I've noticed that students do or don't do. There's obviously way more than just 10 things, but for today's video, we're going to dive into the top 10 things that young musicians should be doing. These things are in no particular order, but I think that especially the last one is super important for you to do. Number 1, subdividing. Many young musicians struggle with rhythm because they don't break the beats into smaller parts. Subdividing is about understanding how all the little pieces fit into the big part. So starting simple in common time, obviously the most common, taking a whole note and knowing that it divides into 2 half notes, and that's equal to the 4 beats. And then taking those 2 half notes and subdividing them into quarter notes, and just understanding that process of taking one big part and breaking it into smaller parts. You might hate the math of it and it sounds complicated, but it's really, once you start understanding how it all fits into itself, you're making your life a lot easier. Number 2, playing long notes really loud. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a rehearsal with middle school bands or even adult community bands, and I had to tell people, hey, if you have a long note and you don't have moving parts, you need to play softer. You are not the most important part. When you land on a long note and starting to try to listen to other things that are happening around you and trying to find what's the most important part, you'll start to notice that, oh, holding at a long note and just being is not the most important thing. There's often moving parts, moving notes, different rhythms that are more important than just a long note. Especially, and I'm biased on this, but especially if you're a woodwind player and you have a trill. Nobody needs to hear that. Well, it's there for a reason, but it's not the most important thing, I promise. Number 3, understanding articulations. Staccatos, marcatos, slurs, tenutos, it's all there for a reason. For me, articulations is about how we communicate with each other, at least through music. It's like the different inflections that we use when we're saying things to each other. Can you imagine if somebody walked up to you and said, "Can I ask you a question?" Was that a question? Or if somebody said, "Hey, Timmy fell down the well," you would probably think there's something wrong with that person. So understanding how articulation matches the music and the style and the different ways to interpret articulations is super important. There are oftentimes different things that we can vocalize to help us understand those articulations, like dit, dot, do, all these different things. So depending on the style that you're playing and understanding that articulation is super important. Number 4, and this is one of my biggest pet peeves, is settling for just enough. Many young musicians get their part and they start learning it and they get it right once, and that's it. That's as far as they're gonna work on it. A rule that I like to follow is that if I can play something right with the right articulation, the right rhythms, the right notes, things correctly, things perfect 3 times in a row, then I've learned it. And that includes adding a metronome, by the way. But oftentimes young musicians just get something right once and they think to themselves, that's it, I got it, no need to work on that anymore. And it's just not. That's what's keeping you from being to that next level, being really good. It's about truly learning something, because in the long run, when you learn something, it'll probably reoccur again in music. So you are saving yourself work in the long run. Number 5, and I'm guilty of this one, not marking your music. How often do you find yourself playing a wrong note or a wrong rhythm or doing something incorrectly and you think to yourself, oh, okay, make a mental note and I won't mess that up next time. And then you come back to it and you still mess it up. You're less likely to miss it if you just write it down really quickly, just sharp or second valve, or okay, that's a little bit higher to sing than I thought. As young musicians, we're getting in our own way of reinforcing those bad habits, because then we learn it incorrectly. We learn it with the F natural or F sharp instead of that right note. And by not marking it, we're creating habits in our mind that say, oh, it's supposed to be played wrong. So if you just mark it, I know that most of the time directors don't give you the time to mark it, or they say, write it down. Anyway, 1, 2, ready, go. You still take that time to mark it in and say to yourself, I am making a mental note and a physical note to not mess that. Number 6, not singing enough. Obviously, this one doesn't necessarily apply to vocalists as much as it does instrumentalists, But oftentimes I find that when we start singing something, we have a different understanding on how the music works. Sometimes by removing ourselves from our instrument, we allow our brains to really process things differently. By singing a line, you get to hear the phrasing and the top and the peak of the line, and then where it decreases, and all the musical things that happen, that should happen through your instrument, but are not as innate as they should be. And those things come with time. But the more we sing during rehearsal, the better we sound, the more we match pitch, the more we match the rhythm as is written through our voice, the faster we get at learning those things. Number 7, not listening enough. I have a 1.5-year-old, and I can imagine how she would learn how to speak to anybody if she wasn't hearing us as her parents or the people around her saying things and she tries to match them. Apply that same logic to learning how to play your instrument. How do you know what you're supposed to sound like if you don't know what your instrument sounds like? Does that make sense? Finding recordings of really good musicians at your instrument or the pieces that you're singing, finding something to strive to. I want to sound like that when I grow up, or as I'm progressing and getting better, that's the type of tone that I should be aspiring for. If you don't know what to do that, how are you learning how to speak through your instrument? Number 8, waiting to be told to do musical things. I've worked with so many students and there are so many different backgrounds that some people understand music just naturally. You understand that there are certain things that have to be louder or softer based on the way that the music is written or the way that it sounds in your head. Often young musicians don't trust themselves to take those risks and to make music happen because they're waiting for somebody to tell them to do it. Trust yourself. Don't wait for your director to tell you, can you bring out the melody or add shape to the line? It would save so much time as a young musician if you start taking those risks. I would rather tell a student, maybe don't get louder there and explaining it, as opposed to always finding myself to have to tell my students that there's room for musicality in their playing. Just trust yourself. A lot of you understand music at a different level than we do, and maybe your interpretation is something that I like, or oh, I didn't think of the melody that way. I appreciate you showing me that. I know not every director is like that, but you know, if you're playing music and if you're learning how to do this, take some risks and trust yourself and to do the musical things that you know how to do. Number 9, this is one of my biggest pet peeves, although I have a lot of pet peeves, is not asking enough questions. Sometimes maybe we just don't understand a concept and we are juniors in high school or older and we didn't understand it back in middle school, and now I'm way too afraid to ask on how to subdivide or on how to play my notes right or how to do things correctly. I know that it's not always the best to ask during rehearsal or during class about these things, but you can find time to ask your directors or leave it in the comments here. You know what? I'll just answer your questions to make your life a little bit easier. But so many times I find that when I'm asking a one-on-one during private lessons or anything like that, where I'm asking a student, so how do you do this? How do you, and they just tell me, hey, I'm gonna keep it real with you, Chief. I don't know anything about that. I just been too scared to ask. And it's frustrating because if you had just asked, maybe your director would have just been able to tell you, oh, let's talk about it. And who knows, maybe there's more people in your ensemble, in your class, that don't understand those concepts, and a good reinforcement wouldn't hurt. So just ask the question. It might seem silly, but what is that rule that teachers say? Like, there's no such thing as a silly question. I know that's not 100% true with the questions that I've been asked by my students, but doesn't hurt to ask. And number 10, probably the most important thing that students don't do, or that you should do more as a young musician, is to pay attention. A lot of the time during rehearsal, if I'm playing clarinet and their director's talking to the trumpets, that's it, they're not talking to me. But what if they're saying something about the melody that I'm going to have 10 measures down the line, and it's improving the melody of the trumpets, and that'll apply to me. Oh, you want a crescendo here or a decrescendo there? I have that in the next 10 measures. Let me write that in. Or hearing who has the melody, what's the important thing, what's happening. Sometimes we just get so bogged down in just tunnel vision about our part, and sometimes we barely learn that, but we just get so tunnel vision that we're bored during rehearsal so often. Might as well do something productive while you're doing nothing and start listening to what do other instruments get told what to do, how to fix certain things, how to be more engaged in the rehearsal. I know it's so easy to get distracted, and if they're not talking to you, you're not listening. But if you take the initiative to start listening to your director or the conductor and start taking in what they're saying, not just to you and your section, but to the other people in the ensemble, you will get a lot better, a lot faster. All right, that's it. Those are 10 things that I think young musicians should be doing more. And if you're already doing those, go ahead and leave a comment telling me, oh, you're wrong, I already do that. Great, great, keep doing it. It's often very easy to look at other people and to compare ourselves and to think, how are they such a good musician? Maybe they're doing all 10. And the faster you learn to do these things, or just sometimes even making an effort, will make a huge difference. So start trying to do these things during rehearsal, during classes, during your practice sessions, and you'll start to see the growth. Once you start doing these things, you'll start to notice a progression of your abilities, because then you're more engaged, you're more practiced, you're more confident in what you're doing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.